Welcome to Truth, Money, and Freedom. Today is Thursday, May 9th, 2019. And as I was looking through news articles today, I just see the moral decline of America, the fact that we're in a state of decay. And Conjecture's with me today to actually draw some parallels between modern day United States with Rome, the fall of Rome. Because I look at the headlines today. Let's see, border struggles under crush, arrests highest in 12 years, Fed secretly release 168,000 illegals into communities, chickenpox, measles cases among the children hidden in the trucks. Let's see, more about Trump's tax records. Apparently that's a big story. Who cares? Laura Loomer is in tears after she's been completely banned from social media. She's a conservative commentator. Um, and all the stuff going on with Iran, with Venezuela. Um, so, at any rate, Conjecture and I thought it might be a really, really good time to actually start talking about moral decadence and the state of decay in what is known as the American experience or the culture of America. Hey, welcome to the program, Conjecture.
Glad to be here.
Okay, let's start talking about a little bit about Rome and what's similar to the fall of Rome. And Rome fell over a period of, I believe it was centuries, but they
Yes,
had the same problems that we have today. Let's start with zero interest rates. Let's talk about that for a second. Did Rome ever have zero interest rates?
yes, they did. They were so desperate as their economy was in the decline that they pushed interest rates to zero. You could get a loan for no money from their government.
You know, they were just so desperate to have people borrow money.
Well, they were just so desperate for something that might help boost the economy.
Right, so people would take that money in old Rome and literally take it to build a business or build something that involved employing people to spur, to actually start, economic growth.
However, if it were successful, you would probably have heard the Keynesians of today never shut up about
Yep. Okay. Well, we covered zero interest rates, 0% interest
it. I
rates.
have
Go
one
ahead.
more bit on this.
Sure.
You know his name, Alan Greenspan.
Yeah.
Probably one of the most hated Keynesians in the Austrian sort of school of economics. You know, if you are a follower, and a lot of libertarians are. And, he's kind of famous for pushing, interest rates down to almost nothing, causing, the build up to the housing bubble. But he put out this amazing 700-year interest rate chart. And it turns out it seems to follow around the world reserve currency status for countries ending, but we have pushed interest rates negative many times before. Once in the 1300s, it was double digit negative rates. But none of this, pushing rates down to zero and lower, helped. It all came towards the end of the empire.
At the end of the economic cycle, in other words.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about a demographics problem because in the West today, we do have a demographics problem as countries become first world, traveling there from third world, second world, and ultimately to first world. The populations begin to decline over time, and this is kind of the way things have always been, and that's because people don't have as many kids. They're wrapped up in their careers. They become me people, like we claim Generation X and the millennials have become narcissistic. They're not interested in having kids anymore. Now, did Rome ever have a problem like that?
Rome had a huge problem with that. They put in all of these backward policies. They put in I know what it was. They were putting in these insane taxes, and people were having troubles paying them, much less affording a kid. People who had Roman citizenship didn't want Roman citizenship. And it was when nobody wanted it that the Romans were trying to give it away to everyone.
Understood. Well, I'll tell you what, I'll draw a difference here between America then and Rome. In America, there's enough welfare out there for those who want to have kids who can't afford them. The state can actually pay for the birth and delivery of their kids and actually provide them welfare throughout their entire lives so that, the kids have food to eat. Did Rome do something similar?
Rome did. They had a robust sort of welfare system. They were giving out free grain. It was part of the whole bread and circuses thing. It's from Latin back then, and it's a thing that's still used. Bread and circuses. When they give you food, to keep your bellies full, to keep you, quiet about your problems, because the last thing they want is the poor people starving. Because when they starve, they grab pitchforks and torches.
Yep. And in the case of America, it's AR-15s and AK-27s, but I definitely get your point. Okay.
And they also tacked on a fair bit of entertainment, which is the circuses part.
Absolutely. The Coliseum, where entertainment for them was seeing people being killed.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move to slavery over taxation. In America, we definitely have a problem with this right now, but unfortunately, they're invisible bars that people can't see through, which is and once again, we're talking about the state of decay, the moral decline of America. Taxation is theft. And we could go into the multiple reasons why. That'll be another podcast. But let's just talk about taxation and slavery. And slavery because you are a slave to the state. If you don't pay taxes, you go to prison. So let's just make that mental leap right now so we could further our argument. Was there slavery over taxation in Rome, Conjecture?
People were signing themselves into slavery because if you owned land or so forth, you had to pay a minimum amount of taxes. It was a lot of people's what they would make an entire year. They demanded for taxes, so people would sell themselves into slavery to get out of taxes.
So it was more desirable to be a slave than it was to be a free man and pay taxes, correct?
Yes.
Okay, well, that's essentially what we have here in America today with welfare. Wouldn't you agree? It's
I'm
more
not entirely
desirable
sure
for
where
many
you're going.
people to be on welfare than to work a job.
Yes.
Okay, so we have something similar. However, once again, it's a different idea, but because a lot of people can't, take welfare and see it as actually being confined or being enslaved. But it is. Welfare is a type of enslavement, but it's a very enticing one because you don't have to do anything. You just sit at home and collect checks. But the government does put requirements on you, for instance, inoculations. And that's a hotly debated one as well. But that was how I'm, drawing, basically some kind of continuity between the two ideas. Um, if you got anything more to add on that one, Conjecture? Okay.
Yes. The welfare in Rome, they were giving everyone free grain, to keep their bellies full. Our modern day version is food stamps. They give you free entertainment. The modern version would be maybe those, Obama phones.
Hmm.
They want to keep you fed and occupied and out of their way. They don't want people asking the real questions. They don't want, people going out saying, how about we fix the problems that caused my suffering? But rather they would, they'd give them opium, welfare, just to keep them from asking questions, continue making them, vote this certain way. And, the one thing that, all welfare recipients vote for, well, not maybe all of them, but most of them, is they become sort of entitled and they feel as though the money belongs to them. And that, more than that, society owes it to them. And every election, they feel like society owes it to them more.
Yeah, understood. There's so many parallels to draw on that alone. But I do agree with you 100%. I mean, we definitely have issues here. For instance, we're seemingly told constantly, and I mean constantly, they're pounding it in our faces that the economy is awesome. It's never been better. We know that's not true, and the beneficiaries of this economy are the top 10%. The middle class is actually dying off in this awesome economy. But at the same time, they give us false numbers on inflation and unemployment and even the GDP, which is about, according to John Williams of Shadow Stats, is about half of what the government claims it is. So they keep people, basically pacified, thinking it is just them that is suffering and it's not the people around them. So they keep, basically telling the lie, more people will believe it. Let's talk about hyperinflation. Let's talk about that real quick, Conjecture. We don't have hyperinflation in the United States. There are countries around the world that are going through it right now. Iran, Venezuela, and Zimbabwe comes to mind. And these are all countries that are currently, as we speak, as we're doing this podcast, are going through a hyperinflation. In America, we're in what I would call big inflation, about 10%. Did Rome go through a hyperinflation or big inflation?
Yeah, Rome started with what you would call a big inflation. They started making these coins that either had more copper in them or less gold, and people wised up. And you know how we have those little markings on the edge of our coin?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, back in Rome, that's something they invented to track what the government was doing, to see what Caesar specifically was doing, because they'd take a file, or they'd basically clip the coins, they'd cut little pieces off of them. And when they finally realized that people had caught on, they started, going a little further than that. They just started outright debasing the coins, just adding copper, until the stuff became so worthless by the end. It was taking, I think it was over 25,000 of these coins, and they were pretty heavy, just to buy, a day's worth of food.
Yep, understood. And you're correct. I remember reading about that. Mike Maloney's talked about it too, which was debasement of their metal-based currency by adding copper and putting in less silver or less gold, because they did have gold coins and silver coins back then. So basically, that's how they went through a hyperinflation. And it's very different because we have paper currency today, but it's the same exact concept. We did talk about welfare already, so how about let's talk about special laws for representatives of the state. In other words, we're talking about a two-tier legal system. There's a set of laws for you and I, Conjecture, as citizens of the United States, but in the same time, for instance, senators, representatives, and presidents get away with a lot of things that we can't do as American citizens. For instance, if we sexually harass someone, we're subject to prosecution. But senators, representatives, and presidents are not subject to sexual harassment laws. Do you care to expound on that?
Yeah, I mean, in this parallel, Rome, I'm just going to go to Caesar. He was at one point in time, he was threatened, to go in between office. And kind of like here, if you're in between office, you lose your immunity.
Yep.
And, he would have been eligible for prosecution, is where you hear the term crossing the Rubicon, because they went through this formal procedure where you kind of disbanded some of your troops. I can't remember how it went, before you were allowed to cross the Rubicon to enter. When he violated that, because if he didn't get reelected, he would lose his immunity and would immediately be prosecuted by his enemy.
Yep. Understood. Well, that's
You can,
go ahead.
I mean, you can kind of see how a lot of our politicians are quite desperate to get continually reelected.
Absolutely. And by the way, that's the easiest example I could come up with sexual harassment laws, but there are many, many others. And I don't want to go into them today because they get pretty nasty after that one. That's the nicest one I can bring up. Um, but keeping it moving along here, Conjecture, let's talk about affirmative action versus equal opportunity, Hitler versus Caesar. For instance, Hitler, an affirmative action killer, and then Caesar, an equal opportunity killer. Let's talk about that. So that's West versus Rome anyway. An affirmative action killer, Hitler, went after very specific groups. So, for instance, Hitler hated Jews, he hated blacks, he hated Christians, and basically he felt the world would be better without them. Now, I can be more specific than that. Hitler really, if you read Mein Kampf, Hitler was very, very sure that he was going to help along the evolution of the human race by getting rid of the lowest creatures on the evolution totem pole, if you will. And he said Jews were on the lowest on the totem pole, and they were stopping the world from evolving into higher creatures. As long as they were in the gene pool, we couldn't do it. But he said the same thing about blacks. And then he just hated Christians. So that's kind of what Hitler did. What did Caesar do?
Well, Caesar, his killing was mostly when he was, go out and fight in the battlefield. His enemies, a lot of times, as long as they weren't Roman, he was equal opportunity to everyone that wasn't Roman. He would go out and he would just slaughter everyone. I think it was estimated he's responsible for killing some. I hear estimates that I think they go as high as 30% of the population of, modern day Germany.
Wow. Yeah. So
Just during one of his conquests.
So during this moral decline, we also see basically where literally taking human life is not considered a problem. In fact, i.e., it's considered a benefit. Now, there's many fronts in our modern day culture that say that this is okay. One of them is quote unquote man made global warming. We must reduce the population to quote unquote save the planet. And there's lots of different, I don't know how to put it, programs on the front to actually cause this to happen. We talk about this in our Discord group all the time. Everything from GMO foods to geoengineering, vaccination programs, lots of things there that prevent the population from growing. And not to mention what they do in Africa. They're desperate to keep the populations down in Africa to prevent them from developing. But I would say that there's definitely similarities between Caesar and the West. And once again, the smaller the population is, the easier it is to control. So would you say that that's the parallel we can draw between modern day America and Rome?
Well, I mean, Rome, they had this interesting thing that even goes a little beyond. There's a saying, yeah, back in ancient Rome that was desert and call it peace. As in their foreign policy was if their enemies are dead, they can't invade Rome.
Hmm. Yep. So I meant, similar parallels. Okay, let's move on to the ounce of gold myth. This is one that's one of my favorites, and a lot of people have talked about this in the past. And it's, of course, that an ounce of gold back in the days of Rome would buy you a toga, a belt, and a pair of sandals. Where equally today, an ounce of gold will buy you a custom, tailor-made suit, a belt, and a nice pair of shoes. And that's actually technically a myth, and we can go into more detail on this. Mike Maloney expounds on this on one of his Hidden Secrets of Money episodes. But Conjecture, I'm going to turn this one over to you. Do you want to talk about that myth?
Well, it kind of refers to when gold is money. When gold is the money and, it's being honestly kept, the myth is true because your purchasing power always goes up because the money is scarce. And it, by being money, creates monetary demand, which gives it this value. We have, back in the days of Rome, the way that people kept themselves out of the hyperinflation was by holding on to the coins with the most gold content. Gresher's law, you keep the more rare coins, and the good money or the bad money chases out the good money essentially. And something similar has happened with us, is that we have gotten rid of gold and we've just gone to this bad money. And because gold, we don't have the monetary demand for it, and we have been able to achieve the almost entirely worldwide policy not to use gold, the true money, as money. We have taken away from its purchasing power.
Yep. But also, too, the bringing in of automation with technology has changed this myth as well. For instance, Mike Maloney talks about this. An ounce of gold may have got you a toga, a nice belt, and a nice pair of sandals back in the days of Rome. But today, technically, you should be able to get like 50 suits because of, basically modern day technology. The fact the fabric is made by robots and automation, the suits themselves are made by robots and automation. So it's not like someone was sitting there, with a loom, actually stretching, cotton and then making it into a suit and then making it specific to you like they did with togas back then. So, any thoughts on that one?
Well, that's what I mean when I'm saying that we've taken away from its purchasing power. By denying the market what it so desperately wants to use as money, which is gold and silver because they're scarce in the right proportions, we have taken away our ability to be able to buy what our labor demands.
Mm-hmm. And equally to that, I'm going to bring in some recent news, is that there is a bill that's currently in the House to actually audit America's gold supply. Now, before everyone gets excited, many of these bills have come up in the last 70 years, and none of them became a law. There has not been an audit of the American gold supply since 1953, since Eisenhower was president. Conjecture, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, the reason there are many reasons why they won't audit the gold supply. One is they don't want people thinking that gold is money. Two, that there's a reasonable chance we don't even have the gold anymore. A third one is perhaps we do have the gold and, you know, it's not quite where they say.
Yep, I do think that we do not have the gold. The gold's been gone for, I believe, many, many decades, but it shows weakness. That we do not have gold anymore because that he who has the gold makes the rules, and America's making the rules for the world, and that's slowly going away right now. In fact, not slowly; it's going away kind of quickly. China has way more gold than the United States has. There are estimates. By the way, America is supposed to have 8,000 tons of gold in Fort Knox, and that's the current story. However, and this is important to note, that basically China probably has closer to 30 tons of gold. So that would be the estimate currently for how much China has, because they mine gold in China, but they don't sell it. They keep it. And of course, the SGE, the Shanghai Gold Exchange, is buying gold constantly from the rest of the world. China definitely has more gold than the United States has. So, but at the same time, I'm sure something similar happened in Rome, where Rome had all the gold, and then eventually someone else had all the gold. Go ahead, conjecture.
What I was getting at is that, we could have it and it not be where it says it, where we say it is. Like we say it's in Fort Knox, but perhaps it's in the vaults of the U.S. banks, and we're just not going to get it back. And the other one, when I said that the gold could be missing entirely, is that we could have just given it all away, as, when we finally cut off the link. But in terms of Rome, what they did with a lot of their gold is they mixed it with so much copper, they made it almost unrecoverable, just from all of that copper. The Byzantines did this. They were the sort of the last, branch. They were the eastern branch of what you might call the Rome stock company, if this were, the Rome company, if this were a stock market. And the way they were able to stave off the collapse of their currency and sort of their society is they added 5% to the coins, as in they then became 5% gold from being almost purely copper.
Yep, understood. Okay, let's round it all off here. In interests of actually, stating, the parallels between the fall of Rome and what America's going through right now, let's talk about the state of decay, the morality issues that are basically something that we're dealing with on a daily basis here in America. Conjecture, let me let you start off with the state of decay in America and draw the parallels to Rome.
Well, the state of decay in America would have to be perhaps we have been encouraging people to basically conceive many, at ages much lower than would be accepted, not too many years ago. Rome had this, except they kind of had it for most of their civilization, and that you would have, and it's pretty disturbing, but it was a real thing. Girls that are in the, like the single digit ages out on the streets trying to court a husband.
Right. So basically, would you say that maybe the fact that people aren't getting married and they're having children out of wedlock, would you consider that a part of it? Did Rome go through something similar?
Rome kind of went through this weird thing where it sort of became almost a competition to see with how many people's wives you could sleep. You know, and I'm not joking. It was the idea was that you would sleep with maybe your enemy's wife, and you would try to keep your wife from sleeping with other men because it went against you. But to go and sleep with as many women of these powerful people as you can, it almost kind of became a competition, at least according to what I've.
Yep, understood. Well, I also see the decay in many other areas. For instance, and I'm not saying this to be offensive to people, but it's just a fact. One of the things that Rome went through in the end was the public acceptance of homosexuality. Now, homosexuality has always been around, it's always been a thing. But when the public, embraced it and celebrated it, seems to be, and by the way, many cultures went through this in the end. We seem to be doing that here in America as well. Would you draw a parallel there?
Well, there's a lot of interesting parallels you can draw. For instance, another one is when women gain rights, your societies in the Middle East towards the end of some of those uh, ancient, I think it was 1100s, in some of the Middle Eastern countries, such in the area of like Iraq and so forth. They gave their women's, sort of, their women equal rights towards the end of their empire. Of course, when women start working jobs, they start having fewer kids. But because your society's doing better, you need fewer babies. But it comes down to a few other issues as well. But it sort of is one of the markers to the end of society, ironically enough.
How about welfare? Was welfare, and by the way, I'm asking these honestly to Conjecture because Conjecture knows a lot more about the fall of Rome than I do. Was welfare one of the staples of the end of Roman society, or the falling of society in Rome?
Well, yeah, because when they were pushing taxes so high and no one could afford to pay them, what they did is they sort of became the vagrants of Rome. They set up these shanty towns around Rome so they could get all the free grain they could and enjoy all the free entertainment.
Yeah, understood. And I figured it had to be the same because the welfare state has grown so tremendously in America, not because it was easy to do so, but because literally they became priced out of the market with things such as minimum wage, basically low wage growth, but also the jobs disappearing from America, manufacturing jobs. Those were the good paying jobs that we have shifted over to other nations because of greedy politicians and greedy corporate CEOs literally just wanting more money. They can never have enough money. So they shift over to China in modern day America back in 2000, where the average Chinaman made 25 cents an hour, the American equivalent to 25 cents an hour. But now they're really close to $4 to $5 an hour. Did Rome do something similar? Did they outsource a lot of stuff?
Well, that one is a little, I would have to say, one of the places where we kind of diverge is because what the Romans did is they tried to get as much free stuff from their surrounding neighbors as possible. And what they ended up doing is looting their surrounding neighbors that they had conquered.
Well,
Uh,
wouldn't you
they
say
weren't
that?
necessarily,
Go ahead, Conjecture. I'm sorry for interrupting.
I have to say, a lot of the endless conquests of Rome kind of came down to stealing a bunch of stuff from them. When they went to France and England, it was kind of more of looting them. And anyone that couldn't pay their high taxes, because they didn't have anything, they got, and this is me quoting, the riches were extracted from the earth. And some of these places were so horribly toxic, like the mines they had set up, that they'd have this smoke coming out of the top of these, I think it was refineries or something, that if a bird flew through them, they died immediately afterwards.
Well, I would draw a similar parallel because basically that's what we've done by outsourcing manufacturing because China uses up its resources rather than us using up our resources. So we're kind of raping them, for their low labor rates. The fact they don't have any type of environmental controls whatsoever, and then the fact that they have to use their own raw mineral resources to manufacture with, as opposed to those resources coming from the United States. So, would you draw a parallel from outsourcing U.S. jobs to basically sacking, the neighboring towns?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that would be the equivalent, that if we couldn't take it from them. You know what? I didn't see this one, is that Rome was a little more direct. Theirs was sort of through taxation and so forth, and ours was through sort of the manipulation, handing out her manufacturing to, countries that are just so destitutely impoverished that we receive great discounts on our goods.
Yep. So I'll tell you what, before we wrap it up, Conjecture, and first of all, I just want to say once again how grateful I am that you joined me on this podcast to talk about the parallels between modern day America and ancient Rome. But do you have anything you'd like to add to the conversation that we had here, the parallels?
Such as,
Well, anything that we may have forgotten to bring up.
I think we covered just about everything I can think of.
Okay, understood. Well, thank you again, Conjecture, for joining us today at Truth, Money, and Freedom to talk about the parallels between modern day America and ancient Rome in the state of decay of the actually political system, the morality system. I mean, everything just kind of goes towards the end, proving that, America may be going through the same thing that Rome went through. And this isn't just about literally America the dollar, but America the empire, which is probably falling apart at this point. But history is always 2020 looking back, but we're going through it right now. We can't really see it in many ways, I think. But that's why I think this podcast was so important, to draw those parallels between the Roman Empire and the American Empire. But thank you again for joining us, Conjecture. We are Truth, Money, and Freedom. If you guys don't know, down below in the description section, there is a link to join our Discord group. If you so choose, we'd love to talk to you. We have a voice chat, we have a text chat, we share a lot of links and YouTube stories between us. We try to keep each other informed, and we're interested in everything truth, money, and freedom. Thank you again for joining us, and may God bless you all.
I just have one postscript to add.
Oh, go ahead, Conjecture.
Income tax, so you know you don't own your labor. Sales tax, in case you thought you owned that money. Inflation, just in case you're foolish enough to save. Capital gains tax, to punish you for trying to get ahead of inflation. Property tax, so you know you can't own anything. And inheritance tax, so you can't pass on what little is.
Yep, and thank you very much for that, Conjecture. I used to read that at the end of my podcasts. But it's very, very, very well taken. Thank you for adding that. Take care, gang. We'll see you next time.